going to have Holly Aguirre is going to read to us some of the background history on this story that we're going to talk about tonight.
Thank you, Farrell. This is an excerpt from Lift Every Voice and Sing, the St. Louis African Americans in the 20th Century. From Benny Gordon Jr. I started growing up in Brooklyn, Illinois, and then I came to Webster Groves when I was about 9 years old. My mother was a guiding force. When we moved to Webster Groves, she married Reverend Blackburn, but he traveled, so she was like a single parent. I have one brother. Originally, there were two of us, but my aunt expired and my mother adopted her two children and they moved in with us. I attended Douglas School in Webster Groves and graduated from Douglas High School. Then I attended Stowe Teachers College. It's now Harris Stowe State College. After the war, I studied business law at St. Louis University until I was drafted during the Korean conflict. After World War II, I worked for the government at 4300 Goodfellow. We did audits. This was during the McCarthy era. One of the white guys who worked for me accused me of being a communist and I lost my job. I finally got another job with the Universal Life Insurance Company in the city. I had never sold insurance before, but I was given the accounts in the Ville. Then the Korean conflict broke out, and since I was a reservist, I was drafted. I didn't think I should go if the government thought I was a communist, but I went back and served as the first Black sergeant major at Fort Leonard Wood. While I was there, I requested an investigation of myself and I received the results of the investigation after I was discharged. The newspapers wrote about it with a headline that read, "Vindicated after 5 years." Then I went to work in real estate. I started building houses. I figured somebody should be building houses for African Americans. I built houses in Kirkwood, South St. Louis, and on Kirkham Avenue in Webster. Then I decided I would build a subdivision, Marvin Court, named after one of my sons. I did it on my own, and Roosevelt Federal was my lender. They gave me enough money to build a display house, and we put the utilities in. But the people who lived on Newport and backed up to the property did not want Blacks that close to them. They sold their houses and threatened to boycott Roosevelt Federal if they continued to make loans to us. With that, I didn't have the money to pave the street or anything else. I had to practically give the display house away. It was demoralizing. But after a while, I got back into real estate. I have been in the real estate business for about 42 years. But getting back to the swimming pool, when I got back from the Army in 1949, I was up at the drugstore and I ran into one of the Webster Groves councilmen. We were talking and he told me about the progress the city had made on the municipal swimming pool during my absence. I said I was looking forward to taking a dip. "Oh no," he said, "we have to build a separate pool for the Black community." I said, "Don't do me any favors." The swimming pool opened on May 30th, 1949. My mother telephoned me and said, "Lord have mercy, Benny, don't go up to that swimming pool, son, or trouble is going to happen." I hadn't thought about it, but they weren't going to get away with worrying my mother. Finally, on a hot Sunday afternoon in August, I got Frank Witt, who was the only one with a car, and Evalie Wilkerson and Irma Calvin to go up to the pool. I called the Star-Times, which was the most liberal of the 3 daily newspapers, and told them what was going on. A reporter met us at the pool at 2 o'clock, and he got in line to buy tickets. The ticket girl said she was sorry, but she had instructions not to sell us tickets. The reporter asked, by whose orders? And she said, the city council. In the meantime, here came the police with sirens going. The mayor was there and all the city council. The reporter asked us what we planned to do, and I said we were going to sue. We asked George Vaughn to be our lawyer. He had just won the Shelley versus Kramer restrictive covenant case before the Supreme Court. Vaughn wanted $500 to take the case, and that was a lot of money in those days. We were going to have fish fries and barbecues to raise the money, but before we could raise the money, Vaughn died. In the meantime, I knew Ted McMillan from Stowe Teachers College and St. Louis University. He had just graduated from law school, and I asked him if he would take us as his first case. He was starting a law firm with Alphonse Lynch and working at the post office. He took the case for $100. The judge told the city council they would have to give us equal time in the pool, but the council claimed it would be too expensive because they would have to change the water each time we used it. So they closed the pool. It was closed for 3 years until we elected a new city council. I didn't know how to swim, but they didn't know that. It was the principle. My children and my grandchildren enjoy the fruits of what we fought for. Today, I'm concerned about the number of young Black people in jail. It would be cheaper to educate them than to incarcerate them. When our youngsters say they have nothing to do, it hurts me. I would like to build a community center in North Webster that would provide job training, daycare, elderly care, healthcare, home economics, a multipurpose room, a place for young people to get theatrical experience, facilities for banquets, dancing. I'd like to make a joyful noise in this community. I think Thomas Sullivan is going to take us into the next section.
All right, that's me. Hi, I am Thomas Sullivan, and I'm currently a freshman at Webster Groves High School. But when I was in 6th grade at Steger, my principal, Dr. Howard Fields, sponsored an entire project for us to learn more about the Black history of Webster Groves. And one of the ways we did this was having the opportunity to interview many elders and important people from North Webster. That year, we also put on a play about the activism led by Mr. Benny Gordon, and that led to the integration in the swimming pool. In that play, I sadly had the part of the city council member who initially denied Gordon the right to use the public pool. It was hard to play, but it just made me more aware of the dynamics in history, which still show up to this day. It made me think about the power in the city government, who was at the table, who was missing from the table, and how that affects things that are currently working. All the parts of this project made me realize how important it is to do even more learning about history, to understand why things are the way they are today. Before we started the play, I had no idea that there were kids in my own class who couldn't go to the swimming pool on their own if they decided to. They would have to have a sponsor to do so. And I didn't realize that many of my African-American classmates lived in the Rock Hill area, which is part of the Webster School District, but they couldn't come to the pool without a sponsor. And it made me really upset to learn that. I was very fortunate to be able to have the role in the play and to learn about Benny Gordon's activism. But what was really amazing was that I got to help interview his daughter, Mrs. Janice Lau Sandhu, I think, sorry if I mispronounced that. To be in that play, learning this history, and then get to talk to a member of that family who led this history was an incredible part of that school year. So now I invite you to watch the video we made of that interview. And I think you will realize that what seems like it was so long ago actually wasn't that long ago at all.
My name is Janice Losandu. I am a native of Webster Groves. I was born and raised here. I attended Webster Groves High School, grade schools and high schools. My father is the late Benny Gordon. My father, too, lived here in Webster Groves. And you have to remember that Webster Groves in the early years was not always an open community. And it still struggles with that. My dad was a decorated war hero. He served in World War II. And at that time, he was a sergeant major in the Army, and he fought to bring recognition to his unit. And they were recognized and in a way that he felt would lend to acceptance. However, that did not necessarily hold true in the United States Army, nor in this community. As a decorated war hero, he felt that he could return to civilian life and receive some recognitions, that it would provide some advantages. You have to remember that black people and white people had very limited interaction during that day. When he was growing up, he grew up very poor. His mother was a wet nurse, meaning she would nurse, would give milk from her breast to babies whose mothers had to work. And so they were left to be raised by other people in the family. So he had a very hard life. It was during the Depression, and there wasn't a lot of money generally for black people, but especially for a lower economic black people, and that was definitely him. His dad, he did not know. But at any rate, you're asking me how he became an activist. He became very discouraged when he came back from the war. He felt that he should be able to receive a job. He get a veteran's preference, so he should be able to receive a job and enjoy all of the benefits that veterans received. However, at that time, work was limited. For black men, you could either work in a factory like Scullins, and that's now, I don't know that you guys know about Scullins Steel, which is over outside of Maplewood in the city of St. Louis, really. You could become a postal employee, or you could perhaps work as a custodian. You could work as a pullman on the railroad. So it was a very limited occupation that was afforded. So then when you have limited occupation, you have limited wages. However, my dad came home and his desire was to build a house in Webster Groves because he lived in a shack, a shanty, where water would run. The rainwater would come into the home and wet the bed and the floors of the house during the storm. He worked very hard. So he wanted a better life for himself and for his family. He met and married my mother when he was furloughed from the Army on a weekend after church. So he promised that he would come back and they would live, he would expose her or give her a better life than he had known and that she had known. However, when he came home, that all changed. He was not able to realize the same opportunities that other veterans enjoyed here in Webster, and that disturbed him and that angered him. Now we have to also remember what was happening throughout, the timeline in terms of social our civil rights struggle in this area. So there were riots in East St. Louis in 1917, and he came back in 1949. Okay, he came from service in 1949. So there were always sparks of unrest within this general area. So blacks didn't live in a vacuum. They knew what was happening throughout the world and throughout the area. So Dad wanted, as I said, a better life. He tried to build, and he was told by the Veterans Administration that if he was to use his VA benefits, which meant that he could get a home, he could purchase a home with no down payment, but it had to be in an area where other black people lived. He could not live in South Webster. He could not live in areas that are adjacent to this school because at that time it was all white. That bothered him. So the many doors that were closed disturbed him. He did not like living as a marginalized citizen. He felt that he had given he sacrificed his freedom and put his life on the line for this country, and certainly he should be afforded an opportunity to enjoy the same amenities that other citizens in this city are entitled to or enjoy. We desegregated the pool. But that happened in 1950. But prior to that, as I said, Webster Groves is a suburb of the city of St. Louis. It was in the city of St. Louis in 1950, I believe, that the elected officials responded to a U.S. court decree and did, in fact, desegregate the swimming pools. However, that was met with much civil unrest. And blacks throughout the area, city, and throughout the county were keenly aware of the fact that there was a major pushback from large contingencies of the white community, refusing to allow black people to enjoy the public accommodations. Black people pay taxes, you know, so they should have been afforded an opportunity to enjoy the swimming pools and the restaurants, those kinds of things, because they paid for it, and also because they're protected by which amendment? The 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment provided for people after the Civil War, black people, the freed slaves, protection from discrimination. However, discrimination was blatant. It was in your face, as well as it was undercover, okay? So, you know, my dad decided one day, of course he was aware, he read and he was very much aware of what was happening in the city of St. Louis. And he said to his friend, who was a judge, he was an attorney then, Theodore McMillan, he said, it makes no sense that we pay taxes in this community and that swimming pool at 40 acres is off limits. Our children cannot enjoy many of the public amenities. There was the Ozark Theater, there was the Toll House restaurant. So Dad and many other people like Mrs. Hall, Mrs. Calvin, they came together and they decided that it was time. Mr. Hutcher Dixon, Mr. Lee Moss, I think was still here. And they decided that they must go to the courts because we believe that that's our only redress. So he decided to file suit. And that was the beginning of the test for public accommodations in Webster. See, they had gone I wasn't born, but they went as a group in an attempt to seek entry into the pool, and they were turned down. They were told that they could not accommodate them. So they filed suit, and the court determined the city officials closed the pool for 2 years rather than to allow black kids to enjoy that recreation.
I hope you enjoyed the interview. I felt really lucky to meet with her and talk with her. Next, we will hear from Ms. Varkita Quinn. She is a Webster alum, a parent of members of the district, and a member of the school board. Excuse me. Her roots in North Webster go way back.
Thank you, Thomas. I appreciate it. I found a bunch. Can you guys hear me? Okay, is everybody okay? Okay. I found a bunch of articles from that time of the pool. And I was just gonna try to briefly go through the timeline of events according to these newspaper articles. Now, the majority, well, almost all of the articles were from the Webster, they were the News Times back then. I have the first slide is actually from the Globe Democrat. We know the sentiment of the times back then, but for me, it was really different to actually read through some of these things and actually hear the voices. I could actually hear the voices and kind of see the faces in some of these debates. And I invite you to kind of imagine as well. What struck me was that it's really not much has changed. I mean, we have some of the very same divisive tools that are being used in politics, and you'll see as I'm kind of going through this. The very first slide is basically, like I said, from the Globe Democrat, and it's just stating that Mr. Gordon Mr. Gordon wasn't actually part of the suit officially. His name wasn't on the lawsuit. He's part of it, but his name wasn't on the lawsuit. But this is just stating that they filed it in court. This article was May 30th, 1950. The suit was actually filed on May 29th of 1950. The next one, you can go to the next one, Farrell. So the next one is it says a complete text of action given. I'm not going to read this entire article. I'm just going to kind of highlight some of the things. It's kind of hard for you guys to see probably, but one of the little subtitles says decision thoughtfully studied. And it basically they're talking about how they kind of, went through the court decision with a fine tooth comb, and they were trying to figure out what they could and couldn't do. And then one of the highlights of this article says, obviously, with present world conditions, with present world conditions as they are. Oh, I'm sorry. One of the thoughts was to try to build a separate swimming pool for Blacks in North Webster. That it came up, we'll just say that. And obviously, with present world conditions as they are, to attempt to provide a separate swimming pool is out of the question. Irregardless of problems of expense involved and other related problems, the government would not allow such construction. So this topic kept coming up. In just about all these articles, that was a solution. Well, instead of having them swim at us, let's give them their own pool. And I think as we go through some of these articles, you'll start to see that the city never really had any intention whatsoever in building their own pool. They tried to make it an economic issue. They did everything they could to avoid the term race. They kept saying that it's really an economic issue because if the Blacks come to the pool, then the white people won't come and spend their money, which is a race issue. But they kept bringing up all these studies. So like Janice said, and there were other pools, Clayton, I think there were O'Fallon, Marquette Pool, I think in the city, and a couple other pools were all, several were going through the same process of having to desegregate. And they were talking about how their attendance went down and how they were losing money. And so Webster kept pulling that up. It's a matter of money. We're going to lose money. We can't operate like this. We can't operate like this. So I pulled some letters. You can go to the next one, Farrell, if you don't mind. I pulled some letters to the editor. These are interesting. So this one, it was just signed citizen. He or she never gave their full name, but I am going to read this one. I proposed a letter last week regarding the closing of the city swimming pool. So let me back up first. So because they couldn't actually decide right away how to just segregate the pool, they decided to close it. And their excuse in closing it was, since they were going to lose money, then we're just going to close it because it doesn't make sense to have it and nobody's going to come. So this letter said, apropos of the letter last week regarding the closing of the city swimming pool, I agree thoroughly with the cog shells, which apparently was someone else who had written a letter, as to the injustice of discriminating against Negroes merely because they are Blacks. This is a famous line. I went to school in Kansas and sat beside Negroes in classes and escaped contamination. Trust they did likewise. As a taxpayer in our good city, however, I feel that the swimming pool issue at this time is an economic rather than a racial problem. In other words, we have a nice big walloping white elephant on our hands, and what shall be done with it? My information is that before the promoters brought out the bond issue, they contacted leading colored folk and offered to incorporate in the petition a swimming pool for Negroes, that being before court decisions on segregation. The colored leaders said no, they didn't want a swimming pool here for Negroes, as it would bring hordes of riffraff from St. Louis. The problem as it stands today is either admit Negroes to the pool or close the pool as was done. Suppose the city opened the pool to all comers. It is 100-to-1 shot that very few whites would pay the fee to swim, and there are not sufficient colored folk in this city to keep the project on a paying basis. That would mean heavy annual deficits in operation unless the hordes of riffraff from the colored sections of St. Louis materialized. If they came, it would be an injustice to the better class of Negro residents of Webster Groves, and we have many very fine Blacks here. To me, it looks like the feasible and sensible thing to do for the city is to lease or sell the pool to private operators and have them run it under strict sanitary provisions. So that was a very popular sentiment. You can go to the next one. So Mr. Walter Rusan was one of the prominent Negroes in North Webster. He was actually a gentleman who did a lot of work with Eden Seminary. He did a lot of things to try to cross and bridge the racial gap back then in Webster. He built the YMCA for Blacks when we weren't allowed to go to the white YMCA that used to be up there on Lockwood. He did a lot of work, just like Mr. Gordon, within North Webster to just to try to make life better for us. So he's replying to Citizen. Congratulations appear to be in order for Mr. and Mrs. Kenneth Cogshell and Mr. and Mrs. Nelson Potter for their noble and courageous letters suggesting non-segregated swimming in the Webster Groves pool. These good people have manifested a spirit of true democracy. The letter published in your paper last week and signed by Citizen, however, really caused me to attempt to write this letter. It was gratifying to hear Citizen speak favorably of his experiences in attending mixed schools in Kansas. His letter, however, was somewhat disappointing in that while he seemed to agree with the Cogshells that it is wrong to discriminate against Negroes because they are Black, Citizen seems to infer that it's all right to discriminate against them, providing it is on economic grounds. I find it difficult to understand Citizen's reasoning in the case unless his professed love for justice and fair play is to be questioned. It was regrettable to hear Citizen mention the old excuse, which still seems to be making the rounds, that prominent Negroes of North Webster had a swimming pool offered to them and declined or refused it on the grounds that it would bring riffraff of St. Louis out to Webster. I am a resident of the Douglas School District, and I have spent the last 6 years trying to find out who these prominent Negroes were. I have failed to find a Negro who knows anything about such an offer and its refusal. May I ask that Citizen try to find out the truth about this? I suggest he start at City Hall, and please let us know when he has the facts. I'm going to skip some of it. I did like this part that he wrote, though. The solution to the swimming pool has well been suggested by the Cogshows and the Potters. Open the pool to all citizens regardless of race. It is not expected that a profit will be made the first year or two, but in time, people will become accustomed to swimming with people of different pigmentation from their own, and they will find out that virtually the only difference between individuals is this pigmentation, which, as we know, is exactly what happened once they got used to it. Okay, Fred, you can go to the next one. So this was, I just wanted to show again, just some of the comments and some of the sentiments of people at the time. This was an article about a PTA meeting that took place at Goodall School. And for those of you who may not know, Goodall is the school that was turned into apartments next to Hickson. When you go back behind Hickson and go towards, is that Jackson that runs back there? That building kind of, that used to be an elementary school. And of course, Goodall would be the closest school to the swimming pool. So this meeting, according to this article, they had 350 members show up, which was a record, but only the Goodall members were allowed. So it really wasn't even open to all of Webster. It was just the Goodall families. And it says segregated swimming in Webster Groves was heartily approved by an applauding audience at a meeting at the Goodall PTA meeting last week. An overwhelming vote of confidence was given to city officials who were present to discuss the Webster Pool closure of last summer and the possibility of opening it next year. The temper of the audience was shown when a would-be heckler was drowned out by applause from Mayor Clarence H. Apple. Is it Apple or Appel? I'm not sure. The mayor had just answered an interracial question by the heckler, who attempted to ask another question but failed to make himself heard over the clapping. He remained on his feet, however, throughout the remainder of the half hour and question and answer period. It goes on to say that Mayor Apple said, "We will not discuss the racial question tonight because we are not qualified to solve that." So every time that he was speaking, he kept trying to push the economic issue. It's about money. It's about money. It's about money. Further on in the article, it goes on to say, I guess that same guy, I found it kind of funny that they were calling him a heckler instead of just another gentleman. But they apparently he got up to try to say something else, and they said further questions by the heckler who opened the period were interrupted by cries of sit up, sit down, and shut up. So anything opposite was obviously not approved of. They did, after this meeting, apparently this group of people passed out a poll, or a poll was passed out to the group of people. And later on, the mayor refers to a poll that was given out. There were several apparently polls that were floating around Webster. In another article, I will kind of refer back to this one because I think this might have been the one that they're referring to. But the poll was, do you think the swimming pool should be closed for the summer of 1952? This article, by the way, is October 4th, 1951. 72% said no, 28% said yes. Should there be a bond issued for a separate pool? 46% said yes, 54% said no. One of the other theories or options that started floating around was having alternative swimming days. So whites could swim on one day and blacks could swim on another. The poll for this, 55% yes, 45% no. Should there be mixed swimming in the pool? 34% said yes, 66% said no. This is another, you can go to the next one, Farrell. This was another petition that was floating around. Obviously, you can see it was a petition of 1,000 for an all-white pool. It was apparently being circulated by this Dr. Crenshaw, who I guess was an oral surgeon. He was bringing up communism as to why this having a mixed swimming pool would lead to communism some kind of way. So his petition read, we petition City Council to reopen the pool for use by whites only and to take the necessary steps to build a pool for Negroes in their own district. We oppose the idea of opening the pool on alternate days or periodical swimming of the Negroes, since the Board of Education has immediate plans to build a junior high for whites within a few hundred feet of our pool. If the above conditions cannot be met at this time, we heartily endorse the action of the council keeping the pool closed. So obviously this is right before Hickson was getting ready to be built, and we can't have mixed swimming at the pool where the kids are going to be, which the swimming would be in the summer anyway when school wouldn't be in session, but that's beside the point. So then right after that, it says that the swimming pool, okay, city adopts alternate plan. A swimming pool program adopted unanimously by city council 2 weeks ago plans to open a memorial pool on an alternate swimming schedule, 3 days for whites, 1 day for Negroes. City officials had said that even if residents were willing to vote a bond issue for the construction of a Negro swimming pool, materials for the structure could not be obtained. Legal opinion has indicated that segregation of Negroes and whites into two pools might be ruled illegal in future court decisions. Other things, so I can't. But basically, the excuse was we can't build a pool for them because we can't get materials. But really, I think they knew that they weren't going to be allowed to do that because that's still segregation. I know we're kind of running short on time, so maybe I won't read all of these, but I will read this letter that Mr. Benny Gordon wrote. And I can see it better on my phone, so excuse me while I pull it up. It says, white supremacy is impossible. References made to several letters of comment published in your paper relative to Negroes using the Webster Groves swimming pool. I am of the Negroid race, a veteran of World War II and III. It makes my heart ache to read how my brothers are trying to deny me just because of the unfortunate color of my skin. Where is their sense of logic? This Webster Groves swimming pool issue is one of many that is affecting the nation as a whole. In the face of the present communist threat, it is essential that this city and country become, in all aspects, one nation, indivisible. They are assuming national independence and international strength. The day of the white supremacy in the world is over. It was always immoral and is today impossible. This country needs the friendship of these people of Asia and Africa in case of a war. To win their friendship, we must eliminate such evidence in our governments and societies, which lead them to think that America considers people of a darker skin to be inferior merely because of the color of their skin. Therefore, Webster Groves should abolish its tradition of segregation and open the swimming pool and all other city facilities to all citizens, regardless of the color of their skin. On that same page, there were several other letters referring to the communist comments and some other things. Another issue was diseases. People did not want the pool to be mixed race because somehow they got it in their head that they would get venereal diseases and tuberculosis and all these other things. And so this letter, I'm going to try to just read a couple of the highlights. Although I am not completely familiar with the background of the present difficulty, transmission of diseases has been mentioned as one of the deterrents to the use of the pool. Public health authorities consider certain diseases to be potential hazards in swimming pools. These are infections of the upper respiratory tract, such as common colds and sore throats, injury to an inflammation of the ears, ringworm of the feet or athlete's foot, and intestinal infections. The first two categories, inflammation of the upper respiratory tract and of the ears, are probably usually self-induced by improper swimming habits, one's own germs being carried by water into areas where they are normally not present. Athlete's foot is of minor importance and a condition to which we and our children are exposed frequently, both in school and at home. Intestinal infections are not a problem in swimming pools, providing sanitation of the water, filtration, and chlorination is properly carried out. It is my understanding that none of the above diseases is the basis for the present controversy. Instead, there seems to be misunderstanding about two other disease categories, namely venereal disease and tuberculosis. In respect to the venereal diseases, their mode of transmission should be well known to all. It can be categorically stated that they are not acquired through swimming in the swimming pool. The responsible germs are so delicate that they could not survive under these conditions, nor is tuberculosis a swimming pool hazard. In support of this statement, none of the standard textbooks of public health mentions tuberculosis, especially in reference to swimming pools, as even a remote danger. The potential risk to this infection is just as great in daily contacts in stores, movies, theaters, and other public places. Therefore, it is my considered opinion that there is no basis in fact for the rumors that the reopening of the pool will thereby result in increased risk to venereal disease and to tuberculosis. Let's get on with the job of providing a place for our children to swim. This was written by a Dr. Virgil C. Scott, who was the Associate Professor of Preventive Medicine and Public Health at WashU. When I read that, it kind of reminded me of COVID, and it kind of felt like he would have been the Alex Garza of the time with the way that he was saying things. Farrell, can you skip to the Citizens Committee? There was a group in the end of 52. So there was a group that got together so the pool was closed for 3 years. This group tried to get together and said, okay, so if you're telling us that it's an economic issue, then we're going to raise the money. So they did. The city council was saying that the operating cost for the pool for a season was going to be $9,100. The Citizens Committee raised $85,000, and they were willing to put it into an escrow account so that people could use it. And anyone else above and beyond that obviously would just go to the city. So they were willing to raise the money to cover these expenses so that people could swim. The city categorically told them no. And so the Citizens Committee said that the Citizens Committee feel that those who wish to use the pool should have the right to use it if necessary, if the necessary amount is assured, and others would be generous enough not to begrudge them the pleasure. So basically they're like, here's the money. The city's saying no. The city then said that they would have to take a poll to see if citizens would be okay with mixed swimming. So they're kind of going back and forth. The Citizens Committee is saying, you said it was money. And then the mayor is saying, well, no, there's other issues. And we would have to take a poll to see if people would be okay with it. He said it's not financial alone, which was a complete shift from previous claims. So then he referred to a poll that said that these committees, or they said that the majority of the people in Webster did not want mixed swimming. And that's what I was thinking, that he was referring back to the good old PTO one. is either the good old PTO one or the one with the gentleman who was worried about communism, who wanted the all-white pool. And this Robert Turner, who was the representative of the Citizens Committee, was saying, you refer to expressions which you have received from citizens who are opposed to opening the pool, the letter continues. The only petition which we are aware of is Dr. W.C. Crenshaw's petition. At first bore the name Citizens Protective Association on the bottom of the page. The Citizens Protection Association is a splinter movement of the Christian Nationalist Party. It has been proven that John Hamilton was one of the guys passing around the petition, was not even a resident of Webster Groves, and a leader of the Citizens Protective Association was a solicitor for those petitions. So that came up as well, where like these petitions were being passed by people who weren't even living in Webster Groves, which put me in the whole mindset of QAnon and who's the other one? The liberals, what's the other one that they were starts
Are you
with an
thinking of
A?
Antifa? Well, everybody always says Antifa.
Yes,
Or
Antifa.
Proud Boys.
Oh, yes. So I was just like, wow, we're still going through some of this. This was happening back then, and we're still kind of going through some of the same stuff. To make a long story short, obviously they opened the pool. The pool opened Memorial Day of 1953. Farrell found this article, which I thought was awesome. And we just took this little snippet. They were interviewing, this was in 2018, and they were interviewing someone, we're not sure how exactly she was involved, but somehow she was involved in the pool controversy. And in the end, Webster Groves Mayor Clarence Apple, who had adamantly opposed the integration of the pool, was ousted by John Cassidy in elections that were held in April of 1953. 3 councilmen were also voted out of office, and the citizens of Webster Groves voted to reopen the municipal swimming pool. A board of freeholders was elected to write a new city charter. The charter increased the number of council members to 6, ensuring more equal representation for the community. And also that's where the city manager, according to Henrietta Ambrose's book, this is also when the city manager position was instituted. The Webster Groves Municipal Pool opened to the public, black and white alike, in the summer of 1953. Although Webster Groves police were on hand to handle any difficulties, there were none. And this last article was in June of 53 that said that the swimming pool is operating at a profit so far this year. So the whole entire time that they were screaming and crying about not having enough money, once they opened it, they actually ended up making more money. So I just found all of these things interesting. And it also was interesting to me that, like I said, we're still kind of dealing with some of the same scare tactics, some of the same types of just BS. But I will now pass it on to Councilman Emerson Smith, who is going to give us an update about current pool policy.
Thank you, Keita. Good evening. This past Tuesday at the council meeting during the work session, 2 updates on the pool. The city is preparing to open the pool up for the summer according to the county safety guidelines, and also that the council agreed to remove the verbiage that was requiring a sponsorship for non-residents to use the pool. Further investigation found that it was just a policy, not a policy. No, it was a policy and not any type of ordinance. So our director of Parks and Recreation, he's right now rewriting that policy, and it'll be published before the pool season on how that will work, and it's effective immediately. because it's just a change in policy. So I'm pleased to say that we're moving forward with open the pool to non-residents so they can, our sister cities, I call them, can use the pool without any problem or without a sponsor. That's it.
Emerson, just to clarify, will they still have to pay the non-resident rates at this point?
Yes, they will pay the non-resident rate. If they're not a resident, they'll pay the non-resident rate. I did see a comment in the chat box. You know, it's the citizens of Webster Groves, our taxes is what keeps the pool going. That difference between the resident rate and the non-resident rate is just the contribution to the upkeep and maintenance of that area.
Emerson, how big a difference in the two rates?
I'm sorry, say it again.
How big a difference in the two rates, resident versus non-resident?
I want to say it's what, $3.50?
Difference?
Difference, yes.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
Every year there seems to be a young lady who wants to be a competitor in Miss Webster, and they're always so completely surprised that Webster Grove City is different than Rock Hill and Shrewsbury, and they think it has to do with the school district. Is there any accommodation for the Webster Grove School District students that want to compete to be Miss Webster within that that competition in the summer?
Well, that was another topic that was discussed this past Tuesday. There's been less interest in applicants applying for Miss Webster. I believe I read there was only 2 for last year. So that, well, I guess it was, 19. So the Miss Webster is sunsetting. So it will no longer be any type of Miss Webster competition or, so that'll be gone. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Emerson, Emerson,
Yeah.
I'm not sure if this is a question or a comment, but I recall when there, about 3 years ago, I think, there was a large, quite heated Facebook community conversation about the swimming pool and fund differences. And at that time, there was a gentleman who said, you know, my company will start a fund to cover the cost and difference for school children. And other people said, you know, I'm interested in contributing to that fund. And as Keita spoke about that citizens committee to raise dollars, it really sounded familiar to me. Do you think there would be any possibility if a private fund were to be established to cover the cost differentials? Would there be a way for City Hall policy to interact with something like that, or would it just have to be totally private?
I would say it had to be totally private, but I think it's something that's workable. I remember those conversations, and I actually stated I would donate to that fund as well. So it was something that we can work out possibly to see what type of arrangements can be worked out. Now understand, it's for non-residents. That does not mean only Rock Hill. It means non-residents all across the St. Louis city and county area. So if there's something that needs to be set up special for example, like the kids that are children or young adults that live in the Webster Rock Hill area, then I think that's probably something that could be done.
Could there,
I know I'm not on the panel. May I make one comment on this topic, if you don't mind, Farrell?
Please.
One thing that I'm not sure people know is that last year, the city council approved a program through Parks and Recreation to allow families to, lower income families to apply for some subsidization for Parks and Recreation programs. And so what you're asking about, Elyssa, is not inconsistent with that at all. I think it's a matter of figuring out logistically what that means for non-residents.
Thank you.
Oh, Elyssa, I saw you, I don't know if you were saying something, but you were muted. I didn't know if you was talking to someone else.
Oh, I'm just yelling at my children. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
I knew that's what was happening.
Hey, Emerson.
Yes, but
Yeah, just a quick question. If I understand right, Maplewood has a relationship with Rock Hill where Rock Hill residents can use the Maplewood pool at any time, but I don't know what they're paying. I don't know if they pay the resident rate and non-resident rate, but they have, it's open to all Rock Hill residents and their families.
Two things. I know that Maplewood was thinking about discontinuing that relationship. I don't know if it happened or not, but I've been in contact with Maplewood, and the actual art of trying to keep track of residents and non-resident was too much of a paper trail, and they just charged, and they were supposed to charge Rock Hill for that difference. But it was more trouble than it was worth. That's what I was told.
Okay, thank you.
And we do have the opportunity, in I think about 3 years, our pool is very old, and we'll be replacing that pool. And it'll be the time we can work with Rock Hill to participate in that process, where the pool will be open to Rock Hill residents as a citizen of Webster Groves, Rock Hill.
Is there any thought to, and maybe this goes back to that fund, if a student, as long as a student can show some form of ID, which I know the junior high and the high schoolers have for sure, be different for elementary school, obviously, but if they can show some form of ID, has there been any more discussion as to, I don't know, can they just be automatically eligible for the fund, or like, is there a way that the students can still get in to swim at a cheaper rate? Because a lot of them don't have extra money, and neither do their parents.
I would think all those details can be worked out, Keita. I mean, I do know there are citizens in the community that would be willing to pledge funds for that. But is it something that we work out through, per se, Rock Hill, to be the custodian of those funds? The problem is always from what I remember, and I've been working on this for quite a few years, it was always the kids of the Webster Groves School District to let them use the pool. And then it came up with the conversation, well, what about other kids that don't go to Webster Groves, they go to parochial schools and things of that nature? So I think the best thing, which was archaic anyway, to remove that language of needing a sponsor to go. So I think it'd be more than enough participants in some type of fund to level that playing field. But that's something outside of what the city will probably do. So, but it is workable. I believe it's workable.
I never understood.
Thanks, Emerson.
I never understood that argument. I'm just going to say, because the kids that go to parochial school are Webster residents anyway. So I never understood that argument, but I'm done.
I didn't either, Keita, and not to get too deep in it, every year is something different as far as a reason why it couldn't happen. So fortunately, we've jumped that hurdle, and now we're just ready to move forward.
Thanks, Emerson, for keeping us up to date with the good news, and clearly this conversation reminds us there's a lot more work to do. Elyssa is going to now help us look at parallels between the past conversation that we learned about through Kita's digging and just the kinds of things we repeat today.
Yes, repeating is a theme. And I just want to thank all the council people here too. I know you are all instrumental in your own ways in moving this forward. And I just think it is a wonderful thing that you've done for the community. So I just want to publicly thank you at this time. There's been so much community conversation about this in recent history years. And it's interesting, as Kita pointed out also, to see some of the parallels with the 1950s history and how some of this conversation loop just repeats, and to examine what are the forces there, how are the powers used to stop the progression of the action. It's like an inertia of the status quo. So the conversation loop really just echoes, and it vacillates between being inclusive but that's our tax money, keep it closed down to only those who pay taxes. It seems to go between the two. So on one side, you have, as you look at the slide, let the kids play, lighten up Webster Groves, you have far too many rules. Try it. I won't read all of them, but somebody does point out specifically too that affordability is an issue even for residents, and regardless of intent, the impact of the pool policy is felt disproportionately by Black families in the Webster Groves School District. These comments come from a survey as well as Facebook community conversations. And was there another source, Farrell, or were those the two sources of the comments?
I mean, they're repeated so many places, but in particular, there was a giant thread in 2018 on the Community Connect. I pulled most of those from there, and that survey.
Yeah, and the survey was administered by the rec department at one point, just asking about the pool. So these are comments that are out in the community. And then on the other side, you have, it has everything to do with taxes and money. Rock Hill should have to pay for this privilege. It's already too crowded. Rock Hill declined when the pool was built. We'll get flooded with outsiders. All of these types of comments. And what is so frustrating about this loop is the erasure, the willful erasure of context. The context being the history of the pool segregation, the fact that we live both within lines on a map that define our town, but we also live within another set of lines which define our community as a school district. And kids particularly feel most unified as a Webster Grove community in the region. They don't understand why they can't go to the pool. It's asinine when you think about it. More context that we can't ignore is that many of the Black students of the district reside outside of the town lines. Therefore, they're excluded from coming to the pool to play with their classmates without a town sponsor. And that whole notion of a bona fide sponsor from a largely white town is so gross that it puts a lot of people off from wanting to come to the pool under those conditions anyhow. And you have to realize within the recreation complex, this is only the swimming pool. It's not the gymnasium. It's not the ice rink. It's not the fitness center. It's only the swimming pool. And that context that we understand from the reading of Mr. Gordon's words, the interview with his daughter, that wonderful history that Kita traced for us on the timeline, that history has to do with racism and not wanting to share the resource. So we can fix the policy, and it seems like we have fixed the policy, but in my opinion, we have to name and own the fact that as a community, we did not fix that policy for so long. We have to be accountable for that moving forward. Prior conversations with Rock Hill were about them paying a subsidy so that Rock Hill residents could pay the Webster Groves resident rate. Mayor Mahan bemoaned the lack of collaboration from Webster Groves at a 2018 Board of Aldermen meeting, and that got picked up by the Post-Dispatch. And he said it took 2.5 years for Webster Groves to reply to a letter he sent requesting more access for the Rock Hill residents. And then when he finally got a reply 2.5 years later, it was just a flat no. So that's some of the local, more recent conversation history, but we can see those through lines to the 1950s history. Farrell, can we go to the next slide? This is also important recent context that we have to consider. It is wonderful that we finally elected enough city council members who exhibited the political will to consider all of this context and decided it was necessary and important to make our shared communities residents welcome, because what our city council has done now is an example of an intentionally inclusive behavioral change. But it's also important to recognize that city staff has been arguing against this change for years. This was a statement made in 2020 from the director of Parks and Rec, City Manager Steve Wiley. He has since moved on. His statement at the time was, staff continues to recommend that current policies be kept in place. Staff believes that non-residents should not be afforded the same rates or privileges as Webster Groves resident who funded the construction via a bond issue and who continue to support the operations and capital improvements of our facility for the last 25 years, and hopefully with another bond issue in the near future. Lacking agreements for financial support from another partner, staff believes that the potential for overcrowding, the devaluing of the resident commitments to support, and myriad issues of what non-residents get special inclusion versus who does not get inclusion, as well as how to manage those issues at our guest services desk, far outweigh any positive outcomes of increasing non-residents' ability to access the facility. So in March of 2020, this is what our city government is on record. These are the sentiments. And so this can't be a quiet policy change if we're looking for accountability. The city needs to be purposefully and intentionally letting all students of the Webster Groves School District know that they are welcome and they are wanted at the pool. The same message should be given to all Rock Hill residents. And why should we do this? Because think of the historical context that we've all learned together tonight. Because community, because racism, because history, because accountability, and because moving forward. We can't move forward until we're accountable. If you would go to the next slide, Farrell. I hit on a couple of the undercurrents of the feelings resulting from the racism that was baked into our system, which must be directly addressed in a letter to the editor I wrote back in 2018. In the letter, I wondered aloud if we were watching tacit suburban reinforcement of Jim Crow separation laws. And I shot down the financial argument when I noted that many other regional suburban pools are tax-based funded, but still extend non-sponsored opportunities to attend. It's unfortunate the Webster Kirkwood Times switched websites, and so a lot of their mailbag is not archived to this point, but I got a letter in the paper the next week in response, and it could have been written in the 1950s. It was amazing. That citizen had the tone which matched the 1950s response, and they insisted that this was just about money. And the writer asked me personally, why don't I just give everyone access to my bank account the same way I'm saying we should all have access to the pool? It's only about money. If I really believe in equality, hey, why don't I publish my bank account number? And I don't believe he used the word socialism, but he did ask me if I believed in democracy. And the writer was basically incensed by the idea that someone in the community would argue for inclusivity and say it had anything to do with anything other than money. That it was very ugly of me to have named race as a component or insinuate that we might have policies which dated back to racist times, and because racist times were currently not current times. So these conversation loops we've been stuck in since the 1950s and before. I really feel like we've got to get clear on our history and get clear on the context to understand the decisions being made or not being made in the present time now. And Farrell, the next slide. The former owner and publisher of the newspaper, Dwight Bidikofer, in 2017, he had an editorial about this, and he spoke of boundaries and invisible walls. And I found those terms really compelling, the boundaries and the invisible walls of this issue. And he named that historically the city responses had been centered on fear of overcrowding and comments surrounding taxpayer support. He asked a question at the end of his article. He said, can we still have our community identities and be at least regional enough to extend privileges to members of our school district communities? I think it's really wonderful that in 2021, our city is going to move in that direction. And also, I think we need to recognize that the status quo of this is how we've always done it, we always need a sponsor, just the status quo of that concept was so hard to break through. We've begun some of that hard work with these steps to be more inclusive at the pool, but obviously the work in our community isn't done. Now I'm going to turn it over to Farrell Carfield, who's going to address the question of what else can the community do to make our pool more consciously inclusive.
Thank you, Elyssa. I'm just going to spend a minute on this. I want to make sure we have time for some crowd feedback and stuff. But I have a good friend in U City who volunteers a lot for the U City Swim Club, and her work has really been inspiring to me in terms of opening my eyes to what it would look like if we were really trying, you know, not just being neutral and sort of riding along with the currents of the past, but if we were going to do something that actually was proactive and intentionally inclusive. And there, I think this is a private swim club. It's like the swim team, but they have been working really hard to connect deeply with their school district, to do a lot of free water safety classes, to just try to get all kids in their community to learn how to swim at a young age and embrace like the community feel and swimming as like a joyful thing for everyone. This summer they had some cool Zooms. I mean, it opened my mind. Like, if y'all want to find out more, there's a bunch of things you can follow on social media. Diversity in Aquatics has been a resource I've learned a lot from recently, just about there's disparities stemming from everything we just saw, which was not that long ago, in terms of people's comfort level with water and their safety with water. I know, I'm sure you all saw the tragedy that happened in Branson a couple of years ago. That's just heartbreaking and unforgivable. So we're going to have to work double time to make up for that. At the same time as, you know, I also want to, I know that there are like beautiful, strong swimming programs with leaders that are people of color pushing for swimming as a sport that everyone can participate in nationally. And I actually heard a couple of them speak, and they said they don't like to talk about the drowning rates and all that because it's sort of a deficit thinking. So I just wanted to name that, just that there's some, you know, strong, powerful swimmers that are looking to create a new era of swimming that looks like our world, right? Another cool thing they're doing is they had like a family book club, and they read this book, which was set in the 60s in Mississippi, and it's like a YA book, and they read it with their kids so that their kids understand like what we need to overcome. I just thought that was a really beautiful way to build a new future. And so anyway, as we talk about the how to make it inclusive in terms of money and people's ability to come swim, there's even more that we could do, I think, just to build a new way of being together.